You can take the International English Language Testing System test anywhere just about in the world. There are satellite nations, maybe not in some of the more remote islands, but pretty much it's offered online and also on paper. So let's get into reading and how you discern some questions. So this is just reading practice. Crick's, Franklin's, and Watson's DNA double helix model helped explain mutations, regular allele formation, generational genomes, and the reasons some develop diseases while members of the same family may be carriers of the disease instead of obtaining the disease. Dr. Rosalind Franklin's fans insisted that her primary research allowed scientists to determine the parallel crosses, the twisting and the turning and then replicating of DNA. Yet, Dr. Watson used the research to state rigid claims of inferiority based on gender and race. While Dr. Watson slurred many ethnicities, his harshness caused many people to believe claims of superiority too. For example, he claimed that sex-linked genes permitted Latin men to have more of a libido, which coalesced with derogatory stereotypes influenced by the media. One of his worst hypotheses was that the intelligence quotient tests were linked to racial superiority instead of differences in socialization, isolated experiences, segregated museums and educational institutions, and economic disparities. There is little to wonder on the reason Dr. Watson's chancellorship and his DNA honorariums were revoked, although scientific scholars continue to use his research chartered with his partners Crick and Franklin. So when we get ready to take apart this test, we can pretty much go down to the bottom of this and we can see that there's a strange irony. Now, the author does say there is little to wonder on the reason Dr. Watson's chancellorship and his DNA honorariums were revoked, although scientific scholars continue to use his research. That's irony. Because even though the honorariums are taken away, people still use it, and make no mistake about it, the author pretty much feels, the double helix was kind of needed. What the author is really saying is that pretty much Dr. Watson misused the information and he would go around making these claims. And, while there may have been some evidence that people scored lower, you'd have to look at some of the things that were going on too. And to say that someone has more of a libido because they're of a certain ethnicity, that's not even fair, because if you're talking about your genes, you're talking about gene formation, and not all Latin men have the same genes. Their parents crossed. So, and when we talk about sex-linked genes, remember your hair color, your eye color, determined by your mother and who had dominance and who didn't. So that's why the author brought this up. So when you're taking this apart and trying to discern where you go, this is what you're supposed to do. Okay, so now we want to get into the questions. According to the author, Crick's, Franklin's, and Watson's research should do which of the following? Remain as statutory evidence for sexual libidos? Well, the premise of this is that Dr. Watson used the research to state rigid claims of inferiority. And this word here, rigid, really means something. It means it's so rigid that maybe it's not true. So we want to talk about this, and then also this word here, statutory, means in the statutes and on the books and something that remains forever, yet he had his honorariums taken away. So this goes here and you go, nope, this said something different. So become disregarded due to the derogatory comments made by Watson. Well, Dr. Rosalind Franklin died at 37, and she didn't make those claims. And yet, most of the DNA double helix was a lot of her research. Remember, you came here and said fans insisted that it was her who really did the model. So you don't want to disregard it. This is too strong. You don't disregard the whole of this double helix just because, one of the three scientists made a claim like this. And then C, does this author believe that you disregard Watson as a scientist because he stole evidence from Dr. Rosalind Franklin? Well, says that she was supposed to get the claim for it, but it doesn't say that he really stole the evidence. And then here, gave Dr. Rosalind Franklin the sole credit for the DNA double helix model. While she may get sole credit, this may be a little bit too broad. Understand Watson is science, but not pay attention to his derogatory remarks. Now, let's go in between D and E and why we're going to choose one or the other. Do we give Dr. Rosalind sole credit? Because after she died, there was maybe more that went on. And also, here's another part of what this article is about. Unfortunately, this article doesn't really mention Dr. Rosalind Franklin, and we really should take a moment out to give her the credit for doing that. There was a lot of argument over that, but it's really not talking about Dr. Franklin, either while she was alive or posthumously. It's talking about now. And now we're going to get into this here. Do we want to give her the sole credit? Well, while she may get the sole credit for the model, is this really what the article's about? So what should we really do? And what is the real thing that we're talking about here? We got into the explanation in paragraph 1 of how the, how the mutations, the alleles, the two, dominant recessive, or if they're both dominant, the formation makes into what these items are, in your blood and in your body, and how you're going to be tall, short, blue eyes, brown eyes. It did go on to explain Watson, and here's the yet part, that Watson used this research to make claims. And then that's the second paragraph, like some of the things he did, and it gives specific examples. And then it goes into number 3. And here's the third thing. Kind of says, little wonder to the reason his honorarium was revoked. So if it was revoked, I don't think the author would say, let's give the sole credit, and at the same time, you wouldn't revoke Crick and Franklin. But, understand that Watson was a scientist. He made some good claims, but we should probably disregard his remarks. And didn't get into should it have been taken away or not. Just said little wonder on the reason people decided to. So your choice here is E. Okay, now number 2, Charles Darwin believed that the survival of the fittest doctrine, allowed people to adapt and survive based on their environment. Okay, which choice answers the basic difference between Watson and Darwin? You can overthink this and think about how Darwin used the turtles on the Galapagos Islands, and how he, how he thought, that some of the structures that turtles have, they started adapting. And also some of the birds, they had to adapt their beaks based on where they lived. Also, if other birds flew into the island and started mating with them, there were adaptations made between those two genes coming. But his whole concept of survival of the fittest was, if you can adapt, if you can survive, for instance, penguins who can pretty much survive in Alaska, in certain times of the year will, migrate to South America because they have that kind of structure. But then you have other types of birds, like some owls, like barn owls made in one region can't really survive in, places like Iceland and in Alaska. So that's more of what his survival of the fittest meant. But the point is, without really reading about Charles Darwin, you're going to have to go over and you're going to have to look at what's happening here. And you're going to have to say Watson and Darwin agreed completely that gene formation allowed dominant genes to cause stronger people. Well, we never really talked about dominant genes. And dominant genes don't mean you're stronger. Dominant genes means that it was stronger and there's a dominant gene in your body. For instance, my hair is black. My parents have black hair. So there's the dominance there. Because both of them had black hair, there's a dominance for my hair, to become black. So this is off base. Okay. You're not necessarily, the dominant genes may cause you to have more body mass, but we're not talking about dominance as far as, strength. We're talking about okay, this is a capital letter tall. Your dad, capital letter tall. We're talking about this kind of dominance. Okay, for those of you who remember this from high school biology, this is incomplete dominance, and this is total dominance. So, you have a choice. If you were doing a cross here, you get into that. But Darwin never really kind of got into all of these genetic explanations. So you don't have to worry about these. Okay, you just have to think also about what is being said in the paragraph. And they're really not bringing up Darwin until you talk about the question. And so that's what makes this so difficult. So then you want to look at Watson believed that some people were inferior due to their genome, while Darwin believed that people could adapt to their environment based on socialization and individual determination. This might be a possibility. Watson believed that DNA could be replicated in human beings and the superior races should donate genes to the inferior people, although Darwin disagreed. Okay, Darwin didn't get into genes. Watson did. And Darwin Darwin would kind of probably say you don't need to give genes, they can adapt if you put them in the right environment. So C is out. Okay, D is Darwin believed that adaptation did not play a role in DNA formation, and therefore a person with a bloodborne disease could survive in any environment. This is totally not what Darwin is saying, because Darwin was a scientist. He knew, if you're not in the right environment, you don't have something to help with this bloodborne disease. Kind of doesn't matter where you are. So our choice here is B. So you read over the passage. Pretty much that's it. Good luck on your test.